My beloved child, something has shifted in the heart of your soulmate, and the reason behind that smile you cannot see may be far more meaningful than you realize. Lately, there has been a moment they keep replaying in their mind, something connected to you, something that made their heart feel lighter after a long period of uncertainty. They may not be telling anyone yet, but there is a quiet happiness growing inside them, and it keeps returning whenever your name crosses their thoughts. What makes this especially surprising is that they did not expect to feel this way again. They thought they had already made peace with certain emotions. They thought they could simply move forward and leave the unanswered questions behind. But then something happened. A realization appeared at the exact place where doubt used to live, and suddenly, the memory of you felt different. Not painful. Not confusing. Different. Warmer. More hopeful. And that is why the smile matters. It is not just a smile. In this story, it represents the moment someone finally begins to understand the value of what they once struggled to recognize. There is another detail you need to hear, because this is where the good news becomes even more unexpected. Your soulmate has been quietly comparing what they once believed they wanted with what actually makes them feel understood, peaceful, and emotionally seen. And somewhere in that comparison, your presence keeps standing out. They remember the way you made certain moments feel meaningful without forcing anything. They remember conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but now carry an entirely different weight. They remember the little things, the tone of your voice, the way you listened, the way you noticed what others overlooked. Those memories have started becoming clearer, not weaker. And the strange part is that the more they tried to convince themselves that those memories meant nothing, the more powerful they became. Now they are beginning to realize that some connections do not disappear simply because people stop talking about them. Sometimes distance creates clarity. Sometimes silence gives the heart enough space to recognize what noise had hidden. And this realization is bringing them a kind of happiness they cannot easily explain. But wait, because there is one part of this message that could completely change the way you interpret their behavior. That smile may be connected to a decision they have been slowly forming in private. They are thinking about what it would feel like to finally stop pretending that everything is fine without you in their life. They are wondering what could happen if they allowed themselves to be honest instead of protecting themselves with pride, hesitation, or old assumptions. They may still be taking their time, but something inside them has already moved. The person who once avoided certain thoughts is now willingly returning to them. The person who once looked for reasons to stay distant is now noticing reasons to come closer emotionally. And the most beautiful part is that this shift does not feel forced. It feels natural. It feels like something finally making sense after a long period of confusion. Your soulmate may still have questions, but one thing is becoming harder for them to deny: the connection you shared left an impression that time alone could not erase. And here is the revelation you were meant to hear today: the good news may not arrive in the dramatic way you imagine. It may begin with something incredibly simple. A message written and rewritten, a memory that suddenly makes them smile, a conversation where your name is mentioned, or a quiet moment when they finally admit to themselves, "I still care." That single realization can become the doorway to everything that follows. Your soulmate's smile is symbolic of hope returning where uncertainty once lived. They are beginning to understand that what happened between you was not as insignificant as they once tried to make it seem. And while you cannot know exactly what they will do next, this story is moving toward a moment of truth, one where hidden feelings become harder to hide and old assumptions begin to lose their power. So do not rush the next chapter. Let the mystery unfold. Because the most surprising part of this story is not that your soulmate is smiling. It is why they are smiling, and the reason behind it may reveal that they have finally started seeing you through completely different eyes. Something has changed in the way your soulmate remembers you, and this time, the change is impossible for them to ignore. There was a moment when they expected your memory to become quieter with time, but instead, it became more vivid. A simple song, a familiar place, a random conversation, even a small detail from the past can suddenly bring you back into their thoughts, and instead of feeling overwhelmed by those memories, they find themselves smiling. That is the surprising part. They are no longer looking at the connection only through the lens of what went wrong. They are beginning to remember what felt right. They are remembering the comfort, the laughter, the strange sense of familiarity, and the moments when they did not have to explain themselves because somehow you understood. And now a question has begun forming in their mind: what if they walked away from something they were never truly finished with? That question keeps returning because their heart has started challenging the story they once told themselves. They may have tried to appear completely unaffected, but privately, their perspective has been changing. The more honest they become with themselves, the more they realize that your place in their story was never as temporary as they pretended it was. Then came the realization that could make their smile even wider. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that you were not asking them to become someone else. You were simply asking them to be real. At the time, they may not have understood the difference. They may have mistaken emotional depth for pressure, patience for weakness, or your silence for indifference. But now they are looking backward with a different level of maturity. They are noticing details they completely overlooked before. They remember moments when you could have demanded answers but chose patience. They remember moments when you could have walked away angrily but instead protected the connection from unnecessary conflict. And suddenly those little choices mean something. They are realizing that genuine care often hides inside the smallest actions. This is why the news connected to your soulmate feels so powerful. Their happiness is not coming from forgetting you. It is coming from finally understanding something about you. There is a difference between missing someone and recognizing their value, and your soulmate appears to be moving from the first realization toward the second. That shift can change everything about the way they approach the future. And just when you think the story is becoming predictable, another layer appears. There is a possibility that your soulmate has recently heard something, noticed something, or experienced something that reminded them of you in an unexpectedly positive way. Maybe someone mentioned a quality that immediately made them think of you. Maybe they encountered a situation where they suddenly realized how rare your patience had been. Maybe they met someone new and discovered that the emotional connection they expected to feel simply was not there. Whatever the trigger may have been, the result is the same: comparison has opened their eyes. They are starting to understand that not every connection creates the same feeling. Not every conversation stays in the heart. Not every person leaves behind a memory that continues to grow in meaning. And that realization can be both beautiful and emotional. Because now they are not just thinking, I remember this person. They are thinking, why does this person still matter to me? That question is much deeper. It forces them to look beyond pride, timing, distance, and old assumptions. It forces them to confront the possibility that the story between you may have paused without truly ending. But there is still one thing your soulmate has not completely figured out, and this is where the next chapter becomes especially interesting. They know their feelings have changed, but they are still deciding what to do with that realization. They may be imagining the first conversation, wondering what they would say if they finally had the opportunity to speak honestly. They may be rehearsing words in their mind and deleting them before anyone ever sees them. They may be wondering whether you would still recognize the person they have become. And somewhere inside those questions is a quiet hope, that perhaps the door they thought was permanently closed is not as closed as they once believed. Your soulmate cannot control the smile because the possibility itself makes them happy. Not because they know exactly what will happen, but because for the first time in a long time, they can imagine something better than the version of the story they had accepted. And that is the real shock. The good news is not simply that they are thinking about you again. It is that they are beginning to imagine a future where the connection between you is understood instead of misunderstood. And the next revelation may explain exactly what caused that change. There is a quiet moment your soulmate keeps returning to, and they may never tell you how important it has become. It could have been something incredibly ordinary, a conversation, a glance, a message, or even a moment when they were completely alone and suddenly remembered how naturally you once fit into their world. But this time, the memory did something different. Instead of making them wonder what they lost, it made them wonder what could still be possible. That tiny shift is everything. Your soulmate is no longer only looking backward, they are beginning to look forward. And somewhere between those two directions, something inside them has softened. They are realizing that the connection did not disappear simply because circumstances became complicated. In fact, the distance may have revealed its importance. They are beginning to understand that some people leave an emotional imprint so deep that even when life moves forward, the heart still recognizes them. This is why their smile keeps appearing when they think about you. They are remembering the version of themselves that existed around you, the version that laughed more freely, spoke more honestly, and felt understood without having to explain every emotion. And now they are asking themselves a question they once avoided. What if I was wrong about us? But that is not even the most surprising part. Something about your soulmate's perspective has changed dramatically. They are beginning to see that the connection between you was never about perfection. It was about recognition. You saw parts of them that they rarely showed other people, and even if they did not know how to appreciate that at the time, they remember it now. They remember how you could notice when something was wrong without being told. They remember the moments when your presence made difficult days feel lighter. They remember the laughter that came naturally, without effort or performance. And strangely enough, the more they remember these details, the less convincing their old excuses become. They can no longer easily tell themselves that the connection was meaningless. They can no longer dismiss every emotional reaction as temporary. There is something persistent about the way your memory returns. And perhaps the greatest realization is this: they are not smiling because they have forgotten the difficult parts. They are smiling because they finally understand that difficult moments do not automatically erase genuine feelings. Their heart is learning to hold the entire story, the beautiful moments, the confusing moments, the lessons, and the unanswered questions, and still recognize the value of what existed between you. Now listen closely, because there is another development hidden beneath all of this. Your soulmate may be becoming more curious about where you are emotionally. They may wonder whether you still think about them, whether you have changed, whether you would recognize their growth, and whether there is still any space for a meaningful conversation. They may never openly admit these questions, but they can become surprisingly persistent. A person can ignore a memory, but it becomes much harder to ignore a possibility. And right now, possibility is exactly what seems to be entering their mind. They are no longer convinced that the only ending is silence. They are considering another option, honesty. Not a dramatic declaration. Not a perfect speech. Just honesty. They may be imagining what it would feel like to say what they actually mean without hiding behind pride or uncertainty. That thought alone can bring a smile because it gives them something they have not allowed themselves to feel for a long time: hope. And when hope returns after a long period of emotional distance, even the smallest possibility can feel enormous. That is why the next move may come from a place of sincerity rather than impulse. And here is the part that makes this chapter impossible to ignore. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that timing changed the story, but it did not necessarily define its value. They may have believed that too much had happened, too much time had passed, or too many things had changed. Yet now they are discovering something unexpected. People can grow. Perspectives can mature. Old misunderstandings can be seen differently. And sometimes the person you once knew becomes someone capable of understanding the connection in a completely new way. Your soulmate may be realizing that they are not the same person who made those earlier decisions. They are looking at you through different eyes, and that alone can transform an old memory into a new possibility. So if you have wondered why this person seems happier whenever thoughts of you appear, remember the deeper meaning behind that smile. They are not simply remembering you. They are rediscovering what the connection meant to them. And the next part of this story may reveal the one realization that finally makes them stop running from the truth they have carried quietly for far too long. There is a realization forming inside your soulmate that feels completely different from everything that came before it, because this time they are not asking whether they still care about you, they already know the answer. The question now is what they are willing to do with that truth. Something has made them look at the past with fresh eyes, and the memories that once felt complicated are beginning to carry warmth instead. They remember your presence during moments when they needed understanding but did not know how to ask for it. They remember the little things you did without expecting recognition. They remember the way you could make an ordinary moment feel strangely meaningful. And now they are recognizing something they once overlooked. Genuine connection is often easiest to appreciate after you have experienced what it feels like without it. That realization has created a quiet emotional shift. They are smiling because the memory of you no longer feels like something they need to suppress. They are allowing themselves to admit that you mattered. More importantly, they are starting to wonder whether you still could matter in the future. That possibility has become so powerful that they may catch themselves smiling before they even realize what they are thinking about. Then comes the moment that changes the emotional direction of this entire story. Your soulmate begins questioning the assumptions they made about you. Maybe they once believed you had moved on completely. Maybe they assumed you no longer cared. Maybe they convinced themselves that you would never understand their side of the story. But now they are beginning to see how many of those assumptions were never actually confirmed. They were conclusions built from silence, timing, pride, and uncertainty. And once that becomes clear, a strange kind of relief can appear. Because suddenly, the story does not look as finished as they thought. They begin thinking about what might happen if two people who once misunderstood each other finally sat down with nothing to prove and simply spoke honestly. Imagine how powerful that possibility can feel to someone who has spent months or years wondering what could have happened differently. Your soulmate may be discovering that regret does not always arrive as sadness. Sometimes it arrives as a smile mixed with disbelief, a realization that says, maybe I still have a chance to understand this properly. And that thought can completely change the energy surrounding the connection. Here is where the good news becomes even more personal. Your soulmate is not only thinking about what you meant to them, they are thinking about who you are now. They may wonder what has changed in your life, what kind of person you have become, and whether the strength they sensed in you has grown even deeper. They may imagine seeing you again and noticing details they once took for granted. They may wonder whether your eyes would still have that familiar warmth, whether your voice would still bring back those old memories, and whether the conversation between you would feel natural after everything that happened. These thoughts can create an unexpected excitement because they are no longer replaying the past exactly as it happened. They are imagining a new version of the connection. And that is a major emotional breakthrough. When someone stops wishing they could return to the past and starts wondering what they could build differently in the future, their entire perspective changes. Your soulmate's smile may be coming from that exact place, a quiet excitement about the possibility of a new chapter, one shaped by greater honesty, maturity, and understanding. And now, before this chapter closes, there is one final detail you need to hold on to, because it may explain why their happiness feels so sudden. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that they do not need a perfect explanation for every feeling before acknowledging that the feeling exists. They have spent enough time analyzing, questioning, and second-guessing themselves. Something inside them is finally saying, "Stop pretending this does not matter." That sentence may never be spoken aloud, but emotionally, it can be enormous. They are allowing themselves to feel without immediately creating a reason to retreat. And that is why the smile keeps returning. It is the expression of someone who has finally stopped fighting a truth they already know inside themselves. But there is still another layer waiting beyond this realization. Because once your soulmate accepts that their feelings are real, they have to face the question that follows naturally: what happens when the person you have been thinking about suddenly becomes the person you want to speak to? That is where the next chapter becomes even more unexpected, because the smile may be only the beginning of a decision they have been quietly preparing to make. Something happened inside your soulmate that they did not expect, and it changed the way they see the entire connection. For a long time, they may have believed that the easiest way to move forward was to stop thinking about you. They tried to stay busy, focus on other things, and convince themselves that the chapter had already served its purpose. But recently, that strategy stopped working. Your memory began returning in a completely different different way. Instead of bringing confusion, it brought warmth. Instead of making them question everything, it made them smile. And that is significant because the heart does not usually react that way to something it has completely released. They are beginning to recognize that what they felt with you was not simply created by a particular moment or circumstance. There was something about your presence that reached deeper. Maybe they did not understand it at the time. Maybe they needed distance before they could recognize it. But now, certain memories are becoming almost impossible for them to dismiss. They remember your expressions, your patience, your conversations, and even the smallest details that seemed unimportant before. And suddenly, those details feel precious. The surprising part is that they are not trying to force these memories anymore. They are allowing them to exist, and every time they do, that smile appears again. Then something even more powerful begins to happen. Your soulmate starts questioning the story they once created in their own mind. They may have told themselves that you had moved on. They may have assumed you no longer cared. They may have believed that too much time had passed for anything meaningful to remain. But now they are realizing that many of those conclusions were never based on certainty. They were based on assumptions. Silence was interpreted as an answer. Distance was interpreted as closure. And uncertainty was mistaken for an ending. That realization can be incredibly powerful because it opens a door they thought had disappeared. Suddenly, they are wondering what would happen if they stopped assuming and started communicating. What if you still remembered them? What if you still understood the connection? What if both of you had grown enough to approach the past differently? These questions can create a strange combination of excitement and nervous anticipation. And that may be exactly why your soulmate cannot stop smiling. They are beginning to see possibilities where they once saw only conclusions. They are realizing that sometimes the most important chapter of a connection begins after both people finally understand what the first chapter was trying to teach them. But there is one detail that makes this revelation even more emotional. Your soulmate is beginning to appreciate the version of you they once took for granted. They are remembering how you showed care without demanding recognition. They are remembering moments when you could have walked away but chose patience. They are remembering how easily conversations could turn into laughter, how comfortable silence could feel, and how understood they sometimes felt simply because you were present. Those memories are now being compared with everything they have experienced since. And comparison has a way of revealing what the heart previously overlooked. They are discovering that not every connection carries the same emotional weight. Not everyone creates that feeling of familiarity. Not every person can make someone feel seen without saying much at all. This does not mean their life has stopped or that everything else suddenly became meaningless. It means they have gained perspective. They can finally recognize the qualities that made your connection different. And that recognition is bringing them a kind of happiness they cannot easily explain to anyone else. They may not have the perfect words yet, but internally, something is becoming very clear. Losing contact with someone does not automatically mean losing the emotional significance they had in your life. And now comes the part that could completely change what happens next. Your soulmate is starting to imagine the conversation they once thought would never happen. They are thinking about what they would say if they finally had the opportunity to speak without pride, confusion, or old assumptions standing between you. They may imagine telling you things they never expressed properly. They may imagine hearing your voice again and discovering whether that familiar feeling is still there. They may wonder whether you would welcome the conversation or whether too much has changed. Yet beneath all those questions is something beautiful: hope. They are no longer smiling because they are simply remembering the past. They are smiling because they can finally imagine a future that does not have to repeat the past. And that is the real shift. Your soulmate may not know exactly how the next chapter will unfold, but they are beginning to believe that the story between you deserves to be understood rather than forgotten. The smile is only the visible part of that realization. Beneath it is a decision slowly taking shape, and once that decision becomes strong enough, the silence between you may no longer feel as comfortable as it once did.